Hello and welcome to the Finance Quarter. I'm Andrew Robertson. Today on the program...
That's not a knife. That's a knife.
We'll look at the lessons for all of us from Paul Hogan's battle with the tax office. We'll also be answering your questions. Today looking at fiduciary duty, a term that's been in the news a lot lately. We'll tell you what it means and how it affects you. But first to a crisis that's heading our way fast and which will affect people in suburbs like this unless the government takes decisive action. Australia's population is rapidly ageing and demand for aged care is set to skyrocket, but investors are shying away from the aged care sector because there's no money to be made. It all adds up to a huge shortage of aged care accommodation in years to come. It's well documented that Australia's population is ageing. With that ageing comes the massive challenge of providing adequate care for millions of extra people who are not just older but living a lot longer. And the aged care system is already struggling to cope.
One of the key issues for aged care is the low returns on aged care facilities at the moment. Our margins are very low.
Which means aged care facilities are not being built at a rate which will provide for Australia's future needs. About 9% of the population is aged 70 or over, which is about 2 million people. This is expected to rise to 20% in the next 40 years, or about 5.7 million people. By the middle of the century, 10% of the population could be over 80. At the moment, it's 4%. That's predicted to see government spending on aged care triple as a proportion of total revenue to 9%, but by 2050, there'll only be 6 people of working age for everyone over 80, down from the current 16. Access Economics health economist Dr. Henry Cutler believes over-regulation is one of the key factors stifling investment in aged care.
There are price controls on the amount of money that they can charge to individual residents. There's regulation on the number of places that the government will subsidise at any one time, in particular regions as well.
Derek McMillan is at the coalface as Head of Retirement Living Services for Australian Unity and knows only too well the struggles faced by those trying to make an adequate return in aged care.
The industry is really bleeding with chronic underfunding, where residents are unable to contribute to the additional cost of the care that's required in order for operators to actually break even, let alone make an adequate return on their investment.
Derek McMillan says the statistics around the aged care industry are an indication of how unappealing the sector is to private investors.
In 2005, a number of beds were allocated by the federal government to operators. Only half of those beds at this stage have been built. That's a very strong indication that there is not the adequate incentive to construct new facilities.
Mr McMillan says removing both the GST on the construction of aged care facilities and the Centrelink implications for older people who sell their homes would make investment much more attractive. Deloitte's Helen Hamilton-James thinks other incentives such as negative gearing would boost returns, and in terms of availability of capital, she thinks superannuation funds should be encouraged to look at aged care as a class of infrastructure investment.
Set aside a percentage of the superannuation pools to fund into aged care, so whatever the percentage is, it would be low risk or lower risk, obviously slightly lower returns, but a long-term aim to increase the levels of funding into residential aged care.
The Productivity Commission is conducting a detailed study of the aged care sector and has received more than 400 submissions. Those involved in aged care are hoping the Commission's report, due out later this year, will offer lasting solutions to one of the biggest problems Australia is facing. Paul Hogan's stoush with the tax office has been grabbing the headlines in recent weeks. It's a battle that's been going on for many years, with some estimating his tax liability is now more than $100 million. But Paul Hogan is not alone. Every year the tax office accuses scores of people of not paying their fair share of tax. So what do you do if you find yourself in the tax office spotlight? Tax expert Adrian Raftery has some solutions. Adrian, cases like Paul Hogan and even John Farnham's manager Glenn Weekly get a lot of attention, but just how wide does the ATO cast its net when it comes to tax avoidance?
Probably it's quite huge. Operation Wickenby is the ATO's main baby at the moment. They've raised probably $850 million in tax liabilities, but they go beyond just the big fish. They look at all types of businesses, they look at all types of individuals. Each year they target particular industries and particular occupations, and they focus on those more than anything else. Aside from that, they also have a look at businesses who are outside sort of benchmarking ranges. So if you are operating a business with a net profit of only 3% and everyone else in your industry is doing sort of 30%, well, the ATO are going to expect to be knocking on your door.
So it's not just rich people that get targeted?
It could be absolutely anyone, from Mrs McGillicuddy with a pension check right through to Paul Hogan and the like.
So if you do find yourself under the ATO spotlight, how should you respond?
Well, I guess the key in terms of dealing with the ATO, if they are going to target you, is communication. Answer their inquiry straight away. Don't avoid phone calls. Don't avoid letters. Respond to them. Get on the phone straight away and say, hey, I've received your letter. Thank you very much. I'm going to work through the process. Can I get back to you in a certain time frame? And make sure that everything that you agree to the ATO, that you actually go through with it and don't be, don't sort of put it off, because that is the last thing you want to do, is annoy the tax man, because you do that and they're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks.
Now, if the tax office tells you you owe X amount of tax, you're suggesting you should pay it first and then have the argument, rather than not pay it and try and fight it.
Look, if you get an ATO debt and they say, please pay it up front, because if you don't, you're accruing interest at currently it's 11.8%. Now, with the rule of 72, if you leave that for 6 years, that debt is going to automatically double. So you're worse off than what it is. And we've seen in some instances like Paul Hogan, which goes back for years, the actual primary tax is a very small amount, but the effect of compounding interest has made it grown 4 times over the last 20-odd years.
Well, just finally, if you've taken your advice, paid the tax, but you actually think you're right, what are your options for challenging the tax office?
Well, the first of all is just dealing with them directly and just stating your case. You may need to get some formal or professional assistance, whether it be with an accounting firm or with a law firm, and raise it with the ATO. Going beyond that, there's an appeals tribunal, and then you can go to a high court and full federal court, and depending on that, how important the case is, the ATO may even fund a test case if it is going to apply to thousands of people.
Well, some good advice there. Adrian Raftery, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew.
The business community is continuing to voice its disapproval with both sides of politics over the conduct of last month's federal election. Wesfarmers boss Richard Goyder says neither the government or the opposition addressed the really big issues facing Australia. And Mr Goyder was particularly unimpressed with the constant talk from Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott of budgets, deficits and taxes.
Unfortunately, in the campaign, there was way too much focus on expenditure and not enough on wealth creation, and I have a very simple philosophy, which is if you put in place structures that enable wealth creation, you can then have the discussion and the debate about how you spend that wealth. But I do worry that we're not talking enough in Australia about productivity and improving how business large or small can improve its output and therefore its performance.
If you have any questions you'd like us to answer or topics you'd like us to cover on the Finance Quarter, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is thefinancequarter@your.abc.net.au. Now, Chris Wingate from Julurup near Bunbury in Western Australia has written to us asking if we'd explain the term fiduciary duty. It's a term that's been in the news a lot lately because the Ripoll inquiry into the financial planning industry has recommended that financial planners be subject to fiduciary duty. Well, to get the lowdown on what fiduciary duty is, I've sought the help of Michael Peters from the Australian School of Business at the University of New South Wales. And Michael, in very simple terms, what is fiduciary duty?
It's a duty owed by one person towards another person who relies on their skill, their knowledge, their expertise. So there's got to be an element of trust. So if I trust you, to give me advice or to do something for me, then you have a duty to exercise due care, skill and diligence, and also to be honest in the way you do it towards me, even though I may not pay for that particular duty.
So when you go to a solicitor or an accountant, or if the Ripoll inquiry has its way, a financial planner, does fiduciary duty mean they have to put your interests ahead of theirs?
That's right. The interest of the person who's relying on this advice, relying on the skill and knowledge, is the foremost interest that the person must try to accommodate. So ideas about getting a commission or fees or any other interest must be put aside and focus solely on fulfilling their duty towards a person who relies on them.
A point you make in your first answer is a really important one. I think it's not just people you pay who have a fiduciary duty.
Unfortunately, or fortunately perhaps, it's a throwback to medieval times when the law was very general, like a motherhood sort of statement. Anyone you rely on should do the right thing and not abuse that trust. And that's sort of come down to us through lawyers and doctors, accountants, and of course recently financial planners. Even though you may not be paying the financial planner or the doctor, they still owe that duty to you.
Now, Chris Wingate asks, at what moment does an advisor become a fiduciary?
That's a very good question because it's a rather blurry part of the law. It's assumed that if you're relying on someone's expertise and are giving you advice, that doesn't mean they're giving you some sort of guidance what to buy, but they're literally telling you, you should buy this product because we believe it's the best product for you because we know you so well. At that stage, they become fiduciaries. It's fairly clear-cut in law.
Now, Chris also wants to know, how long do fiduciary obligations last?
Well, once you buy the product, in terms of financial planning, for instance, your circumstances change over time. Now, the law is not quite clear whether the fiduciary duty finishes when you buy it or continues after you've bought it because your circumstances change. So that's not a very clear point at the moment because it's part of common law, it's part of our general principles.
Michael Peters from the Australian School of Business at the University of New South Wales, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And to Chris Wingate at Jallurup in Western Australia, we hope we've helped your understanding of fiduciary duty. Now, just a reminder, as always, the Finance Quarter is general advice only. Before acting on anything you hear on the program, you need to speak to a qualified expert who knows your financial circumstances. Keep those emails rolling in. Our email address is thefinancequarter@your.abc.net.au. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Finance Quarter.